Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. If you are new here, we are so excited that you are joining us in our conversation. Today, we're really excited about diving in with our expert that we have here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mandy Rourke. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I have a private practice in Austin, Texas. I am also one of the co-founders of Zesho, and I'm here with my fellow co-founder, Sapna.
I'm Sapna Srivastav, also co-founder of Zesho, also from Austin, Texas. And so for those who are not familiar with Zesho and Sessions, particularly our podcast, Sessions are conversations among clinicians. So we talk about topics typically addressed in the mental health world and are able to offer their perspective of clinicians who support clients daily.
Awesome. And today we are pumped to have Dr. Josie Serrata, and she is one of our partners with Zesho and is also a co-founder of Prickly Pear Therapy and Training. And she's going to be discussing alongside of us today the culturally grounded care for neurodiversity. And we're going to unpack what that title means as we meet today, because there's a lot of really important words and concepts even within the title itself. So we're really excited to know more about you, though, Josie. And I know that people that are listening would love to have an introduction of you and your specialty and really anything that you'd like to share as we get going here.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. As we're talking, I'm gonna, shut off my phone so that it doesn't get alarms in the background. I'm Dr. Josie Serrata, like you said. I am originally from San Antonio, Texas, so down the road from Austin. I've been in Austin now, though, 12 years, and I, along with my good friend and colleague, founded Prickly Pear Therapy and Training 5 years ago. It's amazing. We're turning 5 this year. I'm a licensed clinical and community psychologist. So that means I have a dual degree. I bring to my perspective not only the resources and the knowledge from clinical psychology, but also from community psychology, which many people don't know about. We could have a whole episode about that. But that is a field in the in the field of psychology. And really has allowed me to bring in more systems perspective, understanding racism and oppression and how all of those influences impact the work that we do. So I'm excited to have this conversation today and bring that expertise into this exciting and very important topic of neurodiversity. I am a mom of 2 neurodiverse children. And so I have a very personal connection to this topic and have had needed to navigate systems within relation to this topic, and specifically at the intersections of race and ethnicity with neurodiversity. So I bring that perspective as well. I do not identify as a neurodiverse person myself, so that's really important to acknowledge. I don't have a personal lived experience of this, but there are so many resources that we're happy to share of folks who do. We definitely want to uplift our neurodiverse individuals, brothers and sisters, right, who do this work. So we'll be sharing some of those resources. But my perspective is from, the mom, the parent, and just some work that I've been doing in the practice. So I'm happy to share this work with you all today.
Beautiful.
So, do you want to start us off, Sapna?
Sure. So we are, again, talking specifically about culturally grounded care for neurodiverse communities. And so let's break that down a little bit first with you. So how would you define neurodiversity? And maybe we can clarify too, because there's usually these terms of neurodiverse as well as neurotypical that people may or may not be familiar with. And if they are, they may not know exactly what it means. And so how would you define those or break those down for us?
Yeah, so really the term neurodiversity comes from individuals who identify this way and have really pushed the field to understand the language that we use regarding, being typical or quote unquote atypical, normal, abnormal, right? all of those terms that are thrown around. And so they've really pushed the field to similar in ways that for those of us who do ethnic research or racial research, there's in the field of study and research, right? There's been a whole pushback against having white be the norm, right? Usually, often you see in research where you'll have comparison points to white being the norm, right? Of standard of what we should be comparing other behaviors to, right? So there's been a big backlash and pushback. Some researchers still do it, and we're working on trying to get that fixed and adjusted. But it's really actually acknowledging that we're diverse, right? We have different behaviors. We show up in different ways. We have different languages. We have different beautiful ways of showing up in this world, and how we talk and how we dress, right? And the foods that we eat, right? And that there isn't particularly a norm that we should be measured against in society. So for like racial and ethnic research, it's been a pushback around that as white being the norm, right? In the neurodiversity space as well, is that those quote unquote neurotypical individuals being the norm for which we measure everyone against. In actuality, we're diverse, right? We're diverse individuals in terms of how we show up and our language and our food and all of those beautiful ways, our gender expressions, right? But we're also diverse in terms of how our brains operate, right? Cognitively, how we process information, how we process the stimuli that our brain encounters from the world, right? Either internally or externally. And so it just looks different. And so that's really where the framing of neurodiversity comes from. It comes from the community itself. And we're privileged enough to be able to learn from the community who's really pushing us, those of us who identify as able-bodied, right, to grow in the language that we're using. So you will hear, right, there's a lot of TikToks out there around neurodiversity. You'll hear the terms neurodivergent. Some individuals identify that way. And that's really describing, that we just process information differently than what society expects, right? There's a particular set of expectations from society for how we're supposed to intake information and how we're supposed to learn. I found this out pretty starkly with my children, right? Is the public school education system is set up in a particular way that a very heavy emphasis on reading and writing, right? That all children should learn this way through reading and writing. Well, for my children who are both dyslexic, that is not how their brain processes information. That is not how they learn, right? And the mismatch between how their learning style, the way their brain processes information and needs to learn, with how the public school system is set up. That was, we started seeing it really early on in first grade with my oldest one, and really seeing this. A different child, right? The way he was interacting at home and in his extracurricular activities, and then the way he was interacting at school was just a total night and day, right? And so thankfully, we're privileged enough to know this information and have this background. Quickly went to, okay, what's going on with this system, right? Where my child isn't able to thrive, versus what's wrong with that child, right? And I think that's the language, the shift that we're trying to make, is that it's not an issue with the individual, right? It's in that society actually isn't ready for kids who are neurodiverse and process information in beautiful ways and need art and other ways of expressing, right, and processing that unfortunately some of our systems just aren't set up for, right? And so that framing of it is like starting to kind of understand that it is a framing and an issue with society and norms, and that's why we'll try to move away from that language. But folks will identify as neurodivergent, right? They'll use that language themselves to identify the differences between them and quote unquote neurotypical individuals, or individuals like me who process information that is socially acceptable, right? I was a big reader. I could learn that way. That's where I thrived, right? That's how I was able to go through our education system so far, because it was set up for me. It was really easy for me. And I was like, oh yeah, you give me, written word and I can go with it. Right. And so I was able to be privileged from those systems, right? I adapted in those systems really well. And so quote unquote neurotypical, right, is how individuals might identify me. But then the neurodiversity is a group of both individuals, right? Just like we say diversity with represents, we can have diversity across ethnic groups, right? Gender expression, all of the beautiful ways we can be diverse. The same way we can be neurodiverse as well. And so then the last one I would want to uplift is neurodiversity movement, right? This is what I say, we're getting this language from this kind of grassroots effort. This is where my community psychology self comes in, because I love community organizing and grassroots efforts, right? That's our jam and what we do. And so this is really that neurodiversity movement that has come in, of neurodivergent, partly because of social media and access to resources to get their voices out, right? That they're here, that they're beautiful, right? And they might process information differently, or the way they may communicate might be different, but it isn't worse than, right? It's not less than or any of that. It's just that society, we need to do a little better job of adapting to individuals who are diverse in the many different ways. So I'll pause there.
So good. I think it's helpful that you're pointing out the school example too, because I feel like that's a really, really good go-to when it comes to the systems not being supportive of differences. And I feel really hopeful about what you were just describing as far as the movement within neurodiversity too, because I know for myself personally, and just exploring my own experience or within family, I can even think like 10 years ago, having conversations with a therapist about like, hey, what's going on? Like, and feeling a lot of shame around, ways of processing differently, or fear around something must be wrong here. But really, I feel hopeful that we're taking the stigma away from differences, and we're highlighting that this isn't you. There's nothing at all wrong with you. You are beautiful, you are capable. And really it's directing, to what's going on with our systems that we live in, and how can those be more supportive of all of the diverse needs of all of the individuals that process information very differently. So I'm grateful for that. And I think it's just a good thing to continue to like highlight, and also acknowledge that there's so much struggle that I think people internalize because of years and years and years predating today, of what's been kind of planted in their mind and reinforced over and over again, of like, you clearly don't fit in this world. But it's like, yeah, no, you do. The world just doesn't fit well with you, maybe.
Yeah, and I have a good example of that is, my oldest, when he was about 8 years old, so second, third grade, he's a beautiful, vibrant child, always so creative, always has loved art, just naturally, very athletic, right? Super athletic. His first little, instead of a little, toy that, the little, what are they called? The plush toys, right? That they sleep with. He slept with a soccer ball, like, right? So like, just like, beautiful little being. But it got to the point with going to school, and again, in the context of pandemic too, that was the whole thing. And I, don't throw shade at any way to the teachers. The teachers were trying their best, right? It's an issue within our school, our funding. We're in Texas, all of those things, right? It's a whole system issue for sure. But he was getting to the point where he started feeling dumb, right? He started using that word, I feel stupid, I feel, right? And that's a derogatory word that comes from, right, this movement, right, comes from the disability community. And he was already, coming home in tears, and saying, I'm dumb, I'm stupid. And that, like, again, that was like, what is, this is not him, right? He is a thriving, right? Very, very, and has a really good sense of identity, But it just shows you, right? Really early, he was already getting messages that because he couldn't read at the level of everyone else or at the speed of everyone else, right? Or couldn't comprehend at the way the other folks did, that there was something wrong with him. Right. And then again, it was a systems issue because all of the default is written. It's all written in writing, everything, right? You step into a school and it's words, every word, right? We're privileged and fortunate enough that we've been able to advocate for him. We worked within that system for a couple of years to get served the services that he needed. But then we actually transitioned him out into a school that is a school for dyslexia that we have here in Austin. Some cities are really privileged to be able to have these schools, and we transitioned them out, and just walking into the environment where everything is visual, right? Everything's in graphics, right? It's already, just that physical space in and of itself. You can see clearly how it was different. The different environment was for him, right? And it wasn't about him. It was about the environment and how it was set up to meet the needs of kids who don't process the way he does, right? And just the difference of how his self-esteem, we're not having those incidents anymore. We're not having meltdowns. Like his love for learning has just turned on, right? He's always been really curious, but you could start already second grade seeing it, right, go diminish. Because he wasn't interacting with the information they were giving it to him in the way that he needed to be like, oh, right. He's very experiential, very hands-on. And so then now he's like talking, it's just been like a whole amazing turn. And so that's like just a great example of, right, what you're speaking to in terms of, the society norms, how things are set. And those of us who are privileged in this way, we don't realize that. Right. We just kind of navigate the world because the world's set up for us until these moments when it's not. Right. And that was pretty stark. Great example of exactly what you're speaking to. He's the same child in a different environment and is just completely thriving. Right.
Yeah.
In an environment that he needs. And it wasn't enough to do the, add on couple time for him to do his tests or, all the traditional ways that we adapt, right? It was helping, but it was the self-esteem piece, like the like piece of his interacting with his peers that they already at that early age, they're comparing themselves to each other, right? And using language around being smart or not, right? And so sometimes I've caught even him with his cousins, that language coming up. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, let's talk about all the ways we're smart, right? What are different ways? Oh, you so-and-so, little prima, little cousin, you can read already, right? And how are you smart with art? And how are you smart, right? And how are you smart in all these different ways? And you could just see her little brain like, oh, yeah, we're all smart in different ways, right? But the smart being equated with academic learning, right, is the default. Again, that language of like, what's the norm and what's the default? And just being able to start to build, us as therapists, build that other language and understanding is important and key.
Yeah, I love that. I keep thinking of this image held along by your gorgeous earrings. And for those who are listening and not watching, worth it just to come see Josie's amazing earrings. But just keep thinking of that quote or that image of like, if a flower's not blooming, you don't blame the flower, right? You blame the soil, the environment, the amount of water, the amount of sunlight, like change the environment to help the flower bloom. It's not the flower's fault that it's not blooming. And so that seems like just a perfect example of how, changing the environment for your son, changing the resources that he had access to, and the way that he was encouraged has made what sounds like a night and day difference, which is incredible to hear. And so I also want to clarify, you have this experience with your children, and then clinically, do you work with both children and adults, or what does that comprise of for you?
Yeah, my population is adults. And so then with work through adults, right, we've had lots of these conversations. So it's kind of been a parallel process as been going through this with my children, who are now 10 and 7. And the boom that has come from adults starting to realize more profoundly, right? Like, oh, there might be something going on with me, or right, I've always felt different, and now I'm I have access to more information, right, and more individuals from this community are sharing about their experiences, and right, and what it's been like for them, going through the journey, right, if they choose to get diagnosed, and what are these kind of like package of behaviors that have shown up for individuals. And we hear quite a few people reaching out to us as adults. We've got folks, 40s, 50s years old, who are getting diagnosed for the first time, and are choosing to go through that process to be able to have the language to identify and explain, right, to their family members or communities what more about their experiences. So it has been a beautiful thing in terms of what social media, and so specifically TikToks, right? All the TikToks we've had, great TikToks from community members, right, explaining what their realities are and what it looks like in their lives. And so it's really resonating with folks, right? And so the population I work with are adults. We have, our practice has several clinicians. I think the youngest right now that we'll see is probably around 12, 13. So adolescents, adults, and then who knows if we have a practitioner who joins who has experience with younger children, that would be great. But right now it's adult and adolescents.
I think the main curiosity for me is I would imagine that people who are listening to our conversation, and maybe some of this is brand new information to them and they're starting to reflect on their own experience. I think the main question is like, how would you, or what would be some signals or signs to help someone better understand kind of where they fall within kind of the neurodiversity umbrella? I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but like, what would you do, or how do you know, like, am I more neurotypical, or do I experience more neurodiversity? Kind of, I don't know. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think what folks are coming to is just like a curiosity of understanding more. I think oftentimes it is, if we think about, right, the way society is set up and not being yet, hopefully one day, right, but not yet being in a place where it can embrace diversity in different ways, including this way. You'll hear often a sense of like something just feels off. Like I feel like I've had this sense of feeling, having internalized that I am different, right, from early on. Or I have noticed that, I have, they use the term masks, right, and in this field, right, in this community. And so I've had to learn ways, right, to keep it together, right, and hold myself, right. So sitting real tall, holding on to, clenching my hands, because early on I would want to flap or move my hands or fidget, right, or I need to walk around, and I was told, and I was punished for doing so, right. And so individuals have had to learn to mask those behaviors, and now they're curious of like, oh, what would it be like if I wasn't constantly in a way having to hold myself back, right, and act and show up as a particular way because society can't accept me, right, for the way I really want to show up, right. So for example, I was talking to a client just this week around it's 130, right, in Texas right now. It's like 200 degrees out there, and they wear sweatshirts, right, all the time, regardless of the weather. But then when they go into the office, they won't wear their sweatshirts because they don't want to be, brought attention to them, because someone might find that weird because you're wearing a sweatshirt in 130-degree weather, right? And the sweatshirt brings soothing to their nervous system, right? So things like that are ways that have shown up that individuals, just squashed, right? Their nervous system is telling them, you know what, this is a little bit too much hitting our nervous system. We need something to soothe, or, you know, the movement, right? For my son, he also has ADHD, and he does these like vocal stems sometimes, where he'll just kind of like have a high pitched tone that comes out sometimes. And so as a family, instead of being like, oh, you know, and it is jarring, right? But as a family, instead of saying like, no, don't do that, you know, what are you doing? Be quiet, right? It's like, oh, is there something else your body needs right now? You know, do we need to go outside and juggle the soccer ball? You know, your body, you know, has some little bit, you know, extra energy, right? What can we do with that? And just helping him explore different ways that he can let that out, right? But typically what's happened, when we're hearing from a lot of adults, is they've had so many experiences throughout their lives that like, that's wrong. There's something wrong with you. You can't do that, right? You can't wear the most comfortable clothes for you, right? Because it does not what fits what society norms are. And so this sense of, you know, I've had to learn these ways of being, but I really don't like it, right? I really, like, if I were to let it all loose, like I would be wearing, right, my headphones and my head, you know, my sweatshirts, and I would be, right, getting up and pacing around the room, or I would have the lighting in a certain way that I need it for me to be able to be calm. And so those kind of, I think, behaviors have more people are talking about, and some people are resonating with those. And then they're coming to us and saying, you know, what's this about? I've heard these terms like ADHD. I've heard these terms like autism. I've heard these terms, right, like learning disabilities or dyslexia, that have come up. And I'm curious about that for myself. And we have conversations, right, around be based on intersectionality, right? Based on their other identities and how their other ethnic identity or gender identities interact with neurodiversity, if it makes sense for them to get diagnosed, right? Because society is not at a place where it is normalized, and it can be dangerous for some individuals in our society to exhibit these behaviors, especially if you're from ethnic minority populations, right? Where there is that extra attention to your body and how your body shows up in this world. And so there is that consideration too. So they might want to just have therapy and have better process and have a safe place where they can unpack all of this. And they may not decide to get a diagnosis, right? And that's okay too. A diagnosis isn't necessary to validate your internal reality, right? A diagnosis could be potentially helpful if you're looking for resources like I described for my son, right? And if you want to advocate for yourself in systems. So just depending on where you're at. And so some adults do want to go through that process and have a formal diagnosis, so that, again, they have the language and they can advocate for themselves and get, systems set up to the way they need it. And some don't, right? Some are okay identifying with this in the way that they want to, and then sharing with their communities and their families and getting the support in that way, and not necessarily flagging it on their charts for mainstream systems to know about. So it's that continuum of what is right for you, having these kind of critical understanding of what it really means to hold a diagnosis in this society. There's still lots of stigma, there's still lots of backlash, there is there is threat to losing a job. There is threat, right? Because it isn't a norm yet. We aren't to a point where individuals really understand and can have this perspective yet. We're hoping to continue to advocate and move there. And I think the more in our field we can have these conversations, and more clinicians do trainings and become aware, right? Like we can normalize that amongst ourselves, right? And in our field for our clients, and more in our families and our communities, right? Like this is a good starting point for us to have these discussions as social change agents ourselves in this work.
Yeah, entirely. I love all of that. And there's so much there that I want to grasp onto, but I think my clinician brain here is kind of grasping onto the last thing that you said, and kind of being a little more curious about what like neuroaffirmative care involves. What does it look like? And how to get people more accustomed, how to make that more of a norm in our field even. Yeah.
Yeah. So trainings, right? Of really trainings, reading. I mean, just like we have these frameworks for what we do when we're learning, about different diverse ethnic identities or diverse identities. This is just another layer of that, really. And the onus is on us as therapists to do our work, right? To do our work to understand the diverse realities of individuals. And so really being able to then there's a slew of resources and podcasts and amazing books written by and spoken by neurodivergent folks that are really powerful to listen to and learn from, right? So uplifting those individuals, learning from them. And so really understanding, right, that we have to do that work. Right. And I talked about this from a parent angle, and I did a podcast where we were talking to parents, similar, right? As a parent, it's on me to do that work. My beautiful child doesn't have the resources, right? And he's a little human. He needs me to advocate in these systems for him. And so it's on me to, do my own work to heal from my own traumas, right? To heal from my own ableism, internalized ableism, so that I can be who he needs me to be, who they need me to be. Similarly, right, we need to do that work as therapists so we can be who our folks need us to be. And so knowledge, right, increasing our knowledge, awareness, and, doing our work around cultural humility and all the aspects. And then really being able to lean into, right, strategies around the relationship. We know that the relationship in therapy is key and fundamental, right, for any individual who comes through, besides whatever modality you're using. The research has showed, right, we know the relationship is key. And so being able to nurture that relationship and providing relational safety to individuals, and physical safety, right? And so that means understanding what adaptations we might need to make in our physical office environments if we're doing it that way, in our virtual environments as well, volume, lighting, what the visual looks like, transcriptions, right? Like all of those things that we might need to adapt and utilize, understanding what those are to make our sessions more accessible is going to be really important, and making our physical spaces more accessible, right? That means building accessibility, but that also means having, like I said, the lighting, being aware of the lighting, asking the folks that we work with what they need, right, to make the physical space be more comfortable for them. We have like weighted blankets in our offices. We have lots of fidgets and things that folks can use. We allowing someone to walk around if they need to while we're having session, right? Just all of those ways that we might not think of if we don't have this experience, and being, really mindful of those. And again, there's a lot of resources out there, from like what cleaning supplies to use in your office, right? Because of those sensitivities, to, the lighting and the physical space. So just making a concerted effort, right, to be able to design your physical environment, and just like we think about for culturally grounded care, right? We talk. I did a research study a while back, and one of the items we put in there was like, is your ethnicity represented in the artwork in the space that you're in? Right. That's an indication of, diversity, right? And being open to different ways of interacting with the world. And so like that is the physical space, right? Is it set up in a way that someone who's neurodivergent walks in and says, oh, I see, right? I see these tools and these resources that are here that are available for me. versus always having to be asking and advocating, right? And so being able to do those things, and at least gain your knowledge about what those things might be. Always ask, right? Always go. That's why the relationship piece is important, and relate and asking in a way that is humble, right? And asking in a way that isn't, this is where our work comes in, right? Where we're not trying to extrapolate information, or like there's this weird line, right, that we can cross in terms of when we haven't done our own work, and then asking inappropriate ways, right, questions, you're going too far, like this is where we have to do our work, so that it comes from more of a humble ask, a ask embedded in some knowledge that we have gained, right, versus like not knowing and maybe asking in harmful ways what folks need. So knowledge of neurodiversity is important, right? Really positioning our clients as experts, right? Just like with everything else, they are the experts in their realities and their experiences, and us being able to see them as that and validating their experiences. The harm that is done, we hear in these sessions with other clinicians, can come from, again, clinicians just being curious or not lack of knowledge, but the harm can be done of like not validating someone's experience, right? When they are talking about their interactions with systems, their interaction with school systems, their interaction with our public systems, right? And sharing that reality has that layer for neurodiverse folks. And us being able to validate that experience rather than questioning that experience. But that means we need to do our work. And understand what that might look like for individuals, especially for individuals at the intersections, right, of different identities. And one of the resources that we'll share is a great resource, and the author, I love them because they really bring in this intersectional framework in all that they're talking through, right? It's called Unmasking Autism, Discovering the New Faces of Neurodiversity by Dr. Price. They talk about, in all of the way that it's beautifully interwoven, and they do such a good job of like merging the diversity, ethnic, diversity and different intersection identities with neurodiversity in a way that it's not separate, right? Our clients interface with this world not from separate identities. It's all merged together, right? They are a Black autistic person, or they are Latinx with ADHD, right? And they have all of these identities together. They're not teased apart. And so this book really does a beautiful job of talking it in a way that you're like, oh yeah, duh, right? But the way they give the examples and they describe it, it's just really beautifully done. So I would definitely recommend that one as like my top resource. So you can listen to it on Audible if that's available to you, or you can read it. I highly recommend just having it on your nightstand, having it in your office. But that is a great way to just kind of get a baseline of this intersection, right? Of what we're talking about today around the cultural piece and neurodiversity, and doing our work, right? Starting there and then just going from there. They also have other resources that they provide in that resource as well.
Yeah. I think everything that you're saying right now kind of ties in a little bit with one of the questions we wanted to touch on too, is what are some of the pain points that people may experience when they're trying to seek neuroaffirmative care and they're not being met with that. And I think just going back to what you were saying really quick, when you're talking about just a lot of the external environment, and I think that's one, that's kind of answering it a little bit, but that's like one cue of like, okay, I'm walking into a space, yet again, another system, yet again, it's an environment that doesn't support me. And so I can see like that external environment being such a massive part of this. And then I think where my mind keeps going is also just like the internalization of it, where, I just, there's so much talk in grad school around the self of the therapist and what are your values versus the values of the client. And how do you make sure you keep yourself and your stuff over here in the focus to what you're just describing as like the client being the expert and attending to their expertise. It just really makes me wonder about how many therapists may without this knowledge and, conversations like these unintentionally, be listening to a client and think, well, this is how I function, or when I went to school, it was fine, or my kids are fine at daycare. And, without that knowledge, unintentionally add towards that internalization where, maybe they're aiming to be validating of like, you feel a lot of shame around what happened, but they're not necessarily advocating for the client because of that. You kind of see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, for sure. One of the ones that we hear often, it's pretty well documented, especially with individuals who are autistic, the experience of like, oh, well, you don't seem autistic, right? Or you're making eye contact, or like these very superficial understandings. Again, the clinician or the individual might, just don't know, right, the diversity within how these present themselves. And they'll make comments like that, right? That can be super invalidating. I think we often in society, we divert to like comparisons too, like you said, right? And comparison, oh, well, my, cousin's child is autistic and they don't, blah, 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 right? Or, I don't have that experience. And so if I don't have that experience, then, I don't understand why you're having, or why you're having such a hard time with adjusting to that work environment, right? We've talked about, X, Y, and Z, right? So they might be focused on one thing in therapy, right? They might be working on depression or anxiety, but not realizing that, diversity might be a piece of this for why, there's more time needed, right? To adjust to what we're taught, what we're doing, right? And so, comments around the timing or rushing through things. We're so time sensitive in our society. Capitalism has definitely influenced that, right? And so why aren't you getting better already? Kind of comments, right? Or we've already done these things and you're still, something's wrong with you because you're not getting better already. And so those type of comments are definitely in the book. They talk about comparing experiences around like intersecting identities, right? So because privilege can interact with how an individual shows up in society, right? So white individuals who are neurodivergent might have more privilege to be able to show up, right, the way they truly are, versus individuals who are from diverse communities. It might be harmful for them to show up in society in a way that they can be targeted by police. Right. And so they might have had to learn to mask in certain ways that other folks have the privilege that they can unmask in. And so making those comparisons could be harmful, right? Without that understanding of why it is that some individuals can mask and some individuals can't in our society, that because, again, the way norms are set up and how oppression works, where it is a privilege to be able to unmask in certain ways for individuals. And that privilege is not afforded to some ethnic groups, right? Specifically, I'm thinking about Black men, right? It is dangerous for them to show up in society in particular ways, and it can put them at risk for violence. And so all of those nuanced ways of understanding can be missed, and folks can use judgmental language without understanding the context for why folks interact with society the way they've had to learn to interact, because of these layers of privilege and oppression.
Yeah, it's a lot that clinicians need to be able to attend to and remember, kind of like, for bringing it back to the cutesy little flower metaphor of like all the different components that influence the experience of the flower, the experience of the client, and making sure that we're able to attend to how those interact together is really, really crucial. I'm also continuing to think about it from the perspective of a client or someone who's considering becoming a client and looking for support. Are there any particular questions you would suggest that people would ask to kind of gauge if the clinician that they're interested in working with is neuroaffirmative and culturally grounded, or any particular like green flags or signs that you think could be indicators that this could be a safe and helpful clinician to work with?
Yeah, so thankfully there is a neuroaffirmative clinician directory that folks can find, can look for clinicians who have been vetted, not kind of, who have been vetted. These folks will, they look through, we're on the directory, so they look through our website, they look through our social media, they kind of see what language we're using, how we identify and talk about neurodiversity, and then they're able to, to vet and then include you on this list. So that's one great starting point, because then you know that these folks have already been vetted, at least clinicians. And so having some language you can read, lots of clinicians have blogs or newsletters, right? You can read on what type of language they're using, what their background is, you can ask what kind of trainings you've had, right? What's your experience with working with individuals who are neurodiverse, right? And you, just like we do, what we recommend with, finding a culturally affirming therapist, as well as asking the hard questions, asking what their experience has been. It's not a judgment. It's just what you need. And it's okay for you to find what you need. And it's okay for you to ask as an individual around background, around training, around experience, really, truly. And that can really help you find some green flags in that, right? You could ask, questions around like, how do you handle, right, these kind of scenarios, for example, and get a sense there of how individuals respond, and if they feel, and most clinicians, we're trained to know our limits, right? We're trained to be able to say, actually, I haven't had that experience. I need more consultation around that, or here's my plan. I could get consultation, and I know of this group that I can go to, and if that feels sufficient to you of an answer, right, then you can proceed. But you always have, you have the power as a client to pick your clinician. And if it's not a good fit, to say that and to find someone else. But there are resources out there that you can, that have done a little bit of that legwork for you, that you can find, and similar to other, resources like Latinx therapy, or Black therapists, right? These other kind of resources that are available for individuals who are looking for a particular skill set. There is one around neuroaffirmative care, neuroaffirmative therapists.
So good. I was taking notes. I'm like, here are a couple of things that we need to be pointing out going forward from here. I'm trying to think. I mean, we've been hitting, you've answered so many questions. We're kind of looking at our notes. And what other kind of final thoughts would be helpful that we haven't talked about just yet? I know one thing we are going to discuss is additional resources like you're already sharing here, but is there anything else that would be helpful?
I think for therapists, we talk a lot around trauma-informed care. And the reason, that this comes to mind as we're talking about this topic, because we do have some individuals who have been traumatized because of their neurodiversity. Right. We know the statistics around individuals with disabilities more likely to be victims of domestic violence and experience different forms of violence in society. Right. And so being able, again, it's like we have all these lenses, we have multiple sunglasses on, right, for different lenses for which we need to carry. But especially when we're thinking about BIPOC individuals who live at the intersection, right, of neurodiversity and from diverse backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, it's important to also have that understanding of trauma, right, and how trauma impacts the body, how trauma can show up in the body, right, and to be able to for our clients to learn this language themselves. right? In a way that is neuroaffirming, right? In a way that is gonna help them navigate, right? And what might be some trauma symptoms, right? So I think that's just like another perspective, another lens that's really important, especially for our BIPOC individuals, is as clinicians to develop that trauma-informed lens, to understand what that looks like and be able to tease that apart, right? For what might be like childhood developmental trauma, right? Because we talk with my clients sometimes around, yep, what is this? What is this around your nervous system and how your nervous system interacts with the world? And there's the layer of also, because your nervous system was different and your environment couldn't handle that, right? That you have had experiences of trauma too, because of that, right? Added on to, right, complex trauma, childhood trauma, all the experiences, unfortunately, that so many of us are exposed to, right, from early on, because of the intersection identities with, different oppressions. But that language is important to know as a clinician, to have that lens for yourself, right, and your own understanding and conceptualization of your clients and how to support them. But then also, more importantly, to build that language within the client. So then they are able to distinguish for themselves, right, what they need, and to internalize the skills that you're giving them, to get to a point of thriving. But trauma is a definitely important and relevant topic and lens to have in this context as well.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, because that is so crucial, and a component that I would argue is key in underlying so much clinical work, ideally all clinical work. And so I feel like we could do an entire conversation incorporating that as well. We wanted to start in slow too, to really introduce things, but maybe we'll do that eventually. But I do appreciate you throwing that in and making sure that that's emphasized as well, because it deserves to be, for sure. I also wanted to touch on some of the resources. You've already kind of thrown some of these resources our way, which are amazing. And so I was wondering if there are any additional ones, in addition to the book that we definitely need to read if we haven't already, Unmasking Autism. Are there any others that you would particularly highlight or suggest? We'll include them in our show notes, but
and I think you put them in your show notes. But also there's several podcasts that are great, but there is one around, it's called Uniquely Human, which is great and has that perspective. There's some websites around like Embracing Autism. I'll provide some other resources around ADHD as well that are really helpful. But again, I would prioritize, if you're a clinician or an individual really wanting to learn these topics, finding resources that are written and by community members who are neurodiverse, and who identify in these ways, because their knowledge, they're the experts, right? So you want the knowledge to come from them, and they're just the perspectives, right? Just, we just can't do it justice. So those are great resources to start with. You can put them in the show notes. And then there's so many other ones out there that are. I'll also make sure to send you all the one around the directory, because that'll be important to include as well.
perfect. We appreciate that.
This conversation has been so helpful, and I really hope that people who are able to listen today too have found themselves just reflecting upon their own experience, whether that be with themselves, with their friends, families, clients, students, anyone that they interact with in the world, to just really help encourage more conversation around, and using the language even that we're using today, of it being more of this this shift into how can we encourage more change ongoing around the environment that we all are a part of to support neurodivergent folks. And just really appreciate everything that you shared. It was so thoughtful and just informed. And so thank you for your time today. And just in closing, where can people find you? I know we introduced you with Prickly Pear Therapy and Training, but feel free to share anything else around your contact details or any other upcoming events you'd like to share.
Yes, please visit us at our website, pricklypeartherapy.com. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, soon TikTok, so that'll be fun. But you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Prickly Therapy. And our contact information is on our website, so you can find us there as well. And then upcoming, we'll have a training for clinicians around this topic. And so I'll be joined with my colleague Gabby on that training. So we're excited for that to come up. Hopefully, we're waiting for CEU. So hopefully in the next few weeks we can get that up. So please join us. It'll be a 2-part workshop, and so please join us there. And then hopefully we'll have more to come after that. We'll see what other topics folks want to learn about.
Awesome.
And also, before we go, you also have a podcast, is that correct?
Yes, we do. Sorry. Thank you. Thanks. Prickly Couch podcast. So you can hear our theme around being prickly. So our Prickly Couch podcast you can find on all the platforms. And so, yes, please find us there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Josie. We look forward to having more conversations with you in the future, and for others to be able to reach out so they can pick your brain just like we did today. So thank you again. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for doing this and creating this space.